Things went from bad to arguably worse last night as a new amendment was pushed forward by two other senators. And then the Biden administration jumped onto that amendment, which added a few clarifications to the initial rules for regulating cryptocurrencies. But then they left out a whole other lot of regulations and rules and basically have created just this maelstrom in Capitol Hill where we have lobbyists fighting against each other right now. Unfortunately, there seems to be indications that Janet Yellen, the U.S. Treasury Secretary, is behind the push to this new amendment, which only outlines proof of work mining as okay and does not outline proof of stake systems as being okay. And so essentially, all these other systems are going to have to register with one of the ABC organizations on Capitol Hill and figure out how to be monitored for moving money around the world. Of course, as we know, and we talk on this show often, it's pretty difficult to do that. So we had a few comments. Jerry Brito posted a few tweets last night talking about the new amendment, which came forward from Senator Warner and Senator Portman, which both Republican and Democrat. So they have a bipartisan push for this amendment, and it looks like it could easily pass just because it's bipartisan and people want to get this infrastructure bill pushed. And then we had another tweet from Eric Voorhees talking about how this seems to be a play against DeFi, decentralized finance. And we saw in 2017, there was a lot of pushes against ICOs, which was kind of the peak product for the 2017 bull market. Well, 2020, 2021, we have decentralized finance, which is arguably a much more mature product. And now Washington wants its pound of flesh and is going against DeFi. So interesting to see Capitol Hill getting into the technology play, choosing winners and losers, proof of work versus proof of stake, and opting for proof of work. And this also comes oddly after a lot of comments from politicians against proof of work for its ESG narrative. But Naomi, I want to throw it right back to you and also hear Adam's thoughts from maybe like a historical perspective on regulation.
Yeah, I mean, this is a disaster. The new amendment that's been pushed through at the last minute, it's not a compromise at all. It actually makes the original provision worse because it specifies exactly what they're covering, whereas before they kind of had this vague umbrella term and no one really quite had narrowed down the definition of what a broker was. And so it's interesting that you have this competitive, amendment put through by Wyden, Toomey, Lummis. It looked great. It's getting a lot of support. And even the original creator who wrote the crypto provision in the infrastructure bill was like, yeah, this is good. And then you have, Rob Portman turn around and say, actually, let's have this other amendment. And it makes it so much worse. So this is a disaster for crypto. And you have lots of people in the Twitter space who are saying as much, who are pushing back against this. Charles Hoskinson gave a great live stream last night where he was just saying, listen, I have billions of dollars and I pay all of my taxes currently. Now, if this goes through, it just means that I'm going to be hiring less people in Wyoming. I'm going to be hiring less people in Colorado. They're all going to be offshore. So this isn't going to help you get more money from taxes. This is going to make you lose more jobs and opportunities, and it'll mean less prosperity for people. He has, such a great point, because it's exactly what we saw with the bit license in New York when they had this draconian rules that were implemented, and everyone left New York. No one complied with this because it was completely overreaching. It was far too difficult to figure out, and so everyone left. Kraken closed its doors. Like everyone just shut shop in New York. And Eric Voorhees had a tweet where he said, as much. He said, listen, we've basically just bit licensed ourselves out of the entire US market. And so it's not a good situation at all for cryptocurrency. And if this amendment goes through, it is kind of a death knell for a lot of things in the crypto space. But Adam, I'm going to throw to you for your thoughts on this.
Yeah, so I have a lot of thoughts on this, but I'm going to try and keep it pretty quick. I think that the assumption of good faith in this, in terms of our assumption that politicians are acting in good faith, is actually the part that's making it difficult to understand why this is happening. I don't think that is happening. I think that, as we've been discussing most of this week while I've been on the show, this is something that they would like to figure out ways to make it more difficult, right? You mentioned that the bit license had a chilling effect in New York and many people left, and that's true, but not everybody left. the existing financial players who are already in power and who already benefit from the system, they were able to get licenses for the most part. And some people were able to work their way through the system, given you had enough money or sway with the departments in order to get that done. And I expect that that's the very same thing here. So the fact that we saw this second bill emerge, or this second amendment emerge, after one that was pretty good for the purpose in terms of actually providing clarity and actually, you know, instituting controls that can be complied with without completely destroying the, you know, the advantages that are offered by the industry. I think it is very intentional that this came out. And I think it is very intentional that we are seeing a bipartisan push by people who benefit from the way that the current system works to make sure that the rule that gets put in place is one that causes as much damage as possible. So again, I think that so long as we continue to look at these, you know, a lot of people look at politics and they think that there's a partisan problem. It's not a partisan problem. Partisanship actually is not really a thing that I think about much at all anymore. I really think about who is in power and who is advocating for improvements to the system. And you find that that is something that crosses bipartisan on both sides. There are people on both sides of the aisle who will argue for improvements, and there are people on both sides of the aisle who are arguing for the status quo. And that is what we're seeing here, is the status quo is pushing this amendment that we are talking about here that is not good. And the kind of the advocates for the space who have actually, you know, seem to have their goals in the right place in terms of enabling the technology while sustainably regulating it to eliminate as much fraud and danger as possible, have presented something that, again, serves the purpose as they say it does, but that doesn't serve the purpose of the status quo. And so therefore, it's getting a lot of pushback.
Naomi, just off the back of your point, you know, I think about regulators and politicians pushing innovation out of the US, right? But so often in crypto, we see regulators and politicians looking at each other for what to do next. And so if this happens, where do you think these companies are going to go? Or are we going to just kind of end up in a spiral where companies are bouncing from jurisdiction to jurisdiction?
Well, I mean, Binance tried that, right? And what happened? You showed that the long arm of the US law reaches far and wide, and it doesn't matter whether you're jurisdictionless, it doesn't matter whether you've set up shop elsewhere. I mean, it's technically Seychelles, right? It's same as BitMEX, and yet the US government came in and said, you're based somewhere completely different. You don't allow US customers. Also, we're still going to dictate, you know, the way that you run your business. And they do this. So it doesn't seem like it's a good scenario regardless, even if people do leave the United States, because the US government really is just so powerful when it comes to pressuring other governments around the world what to do. Will, did you have some closing thoughts on this?
Yeah, really quick. So the fight's not over, I would say. I think that discussion could happen in a worst case scenario. It depends not only on if this amendment is changed in the Senate, but if there's amendments passed in the House. And then, of course, this bill wouldn't be implemented till 2023, and you have the entire court system to work through. And then even just regulatory discretion depends on how the IRS interprets some of this legislation that would pass, and if it passes. And then you kind of move on to, like, do these industries move offshore? But certainly a very chilling effect coming on the backside of China cracking down on many different Bitcoin industries, to see the US kind of follow up with that example here.
Mm-hmm. But Will, just on your point, as you said, the fight's not over. The best thing people can be doing is call their representative. I did an interview with Thomas Massey where he said, you know, don't write a letter, don't tweet at them, because they can just ignore that stuff. But you hold up a phone line for 2 minutes, that's huge. So if you call your representative, you let them know that you do not want this new amendment to pass, but you want the Lummis amendment to go through, that would make a huge difference. And this stuff does work. So this will be, you can find links for how to do this in the description.